Hi there, this is Solitary Ronan from Solitary Ronan Films, and welcome to another director battle. Today is two modern directors who are still working and are still alive, which might be rare for this series. They're two directors that perhaps aren't very high on my favourites list, but I do think they have a chance. They're two of the directors that are working today that have the chance that in 50 years, obviously I won't be looking back in their career in 50 years, but somebody will be looking back in their career in 50 years and saying, you know what, they were pretty good. Obviously their careers are far from being over. They could take huge downturns, but let's try and be positive. Because after all the great directors we've looked at so far and the great directors that are coming up, you know, at one point they were in their present, their past was behind them, and their future career was ahead of them. It just so happens with Yorgos Lanthimos and Denis Villeneuve, we've seen their past, we're living in their present, and we don't know what their future will hold. Now, obviously you could say, well, in today's cinematic world, certainly in Hollywood, there's perhaps not too much competition for being a great director, and if you're even above solid, then you're going to stand out like a sore thumb. You know, we'll put Korea to one side and Japan and all the great cinema and directors who are working at the moment in quote-unquote Asian cinema, but as far as Hollywood, it's fairly slim pickings if you look at the landscape and say, well, who in 40 or 50 years will look back at and go, they were pretty good. Now obviously both these guys are outsiders who have come into Hollywood. Obviously Villeneuve is going into kind of big Hollywood films. Obviously Dune is going to come out at some point, and his next project is Cleopatra, so he's certainly swinging for the fences. And obviously Lanthimos started in Greece, and he's come into Hollywood, but still the kind of art house side of Hollywood. His next project is Poor Things, which is kind of a riff on Frankenstein, starring Emma Stone, Willem Dafoe and Mark Ruffalo. Allegedly, I think the book the film's made from was supposed to be unfilmable, but it is Lanthimos after all. So again, they don't have a huge number of films. Again, you know, leave in the comments whether you think they should even be included, but I think just for a different spin, it's worth looking at a couple of directors in the modern era, because I do occasionally watch the modern films. So we'll start with Villeneuve. Now, I haven't seen his two early Canadian films, August 32nd on Earth and Maelstrom. The earliest one that I have seen is Polytechnic, about a mass shooting in Montreal. It's a pretty good film. It's very much like Elephant, but what makes it is the BFI release, which has a feature-length documentary. So combined, the two films work better than just the film on its own. But he also did Arrival. You know, his Hollywood films are actually done with intelligence. The audience is actually supposed to pay attention and actually focus on what's going on. I know that's kind of rare within Hollywood these days. He did Ensemble, which was really the film that really impressed me. This was his last non-English language film, and it's an absolute stunner. It just blew me away. For me, it's one of the best films of the 21st century. About family relationships in war and how they can be completely twisted, and just torn apart. Again, you have to pay attention. It's just a stunning film. His films are beautiful to look at. They're always really well acted, and again, there's intelligence behind the films. You know, I've seen reviews where people say on Sondi they felt manipulated, or they could see, you know, twists coming. I mean, for me, I just watch a film and just go with it, and I was completely hooked with the story and the characters. Obviously, if it's not a good film, I can go into, oh, I bet this is going to happen, I bet that's going to happen. But for films that are actually good, that hook me in, I don't try and think too far ahead. I just thought On Sondi's is arguably the best film, one of the best films of the 20th century, certainly one of the best films of the last 15 years, I would say. Then we have Prisoners, which again is a kind of standard Hollywood thriller about a missing child. Hugh Jackman and Jake Gyllenhaal. Again, I've seen people complain about the ending of Prisoners, which I don't mind. I mean, again, it's not one of his better films, but it's still another level higher than, you know, standard Hollywood fare. Again, that's a fairly low bar, you might say. Then we have Sicario, which again isn't one of my favourites, but again, for what it is, it does have some beautiful set pieces. It looks absolutely wonderful. Again, some of it is a bit silly, but again, for the most part, a really intelligent, beautiful film with, again, there's a couple of wonderful set pieces when they go into the house, and then the traffic jam at the border is quite wonderful. And then we have Enemy, which is another Jake Gyllenhaal, and this one he gets to play a dual role. Again, people kind of want to know what it all means and the meaning of the ending of the film, but it's just a wonderful little film. Great Gyllenhaal performance as usual. Again, I think I've turned into a secret Gyllenhaal fan because I do have quite a lot of his films. And then of course he did Blade Runner 2049. I'm a huge fan of the first Blade Runner, and again I went into this with fairly low expectations, but again, Villeneuve, I shouldn't really have had doubts, because again it looks absolutely beautiful, it's intelligent, again you're supposed to pay attention, and again you could easily say, well, that's kind of what films are supposed to be, but in the current state, certainly of Hollywood films, Villeneuve for me is a step above. Again, he's not like in my top 20 directors of all time or anything like that, but I think he is somebody to keep an eye on. Again, like I said, he seems to be swinging for the fences with Dune and then Cleopatra. I'm not sure how bigger you can get after that, but we'll see. Certainly somebody, for me at least, to keep an eye on. So then we get to Lanthimos, who for me probably is my favourite director working at the moment, as far as being a young, or youngish, kind of up and comer, and certainly somebody to keep an eye on. Even though he's making Hollywood films now with Hollywood actors, he's still on the kind of periphery. I doubt very much we'll see a Lanthimos Marvel film, even though on some level I'd quite like to see a Lanthimos Marvel film, if he's actually allowed to do it properly, or in his way of doing it. So he co-directed a film called Best Friends, which I have on DVD, but I still haven't watched because I've got a feeling it doesn't have English subtitles. But he did Kineta, which I've done a video on, which again, Lanthimos is a bit like the Dardennes in the sense that he doesn't tell the audience anything up front. He just drops the audience in. Again, I mentioned in my Dardenne Brothers series, I don't know why more directors don't do that, because it's such a simple thing. Instead of front loading everything and telling and giving you flashbacks and explaining every motivation of every character before the film even gets going, just drop the audience right in it and let them figure it out. Now granted, Lanthimos, even when you kind of eventually click what's going on, his films can sometimes still be a little obtuse. You could be cynical and say he's a little bit Emperor's New Clothes once you actually realise what's going on. Is there much there? But I think that's incorrect. I think there's a lot going on in Lanthimos films, especially about society and our relationship with each other as we get more and more separated by technology, and our fantasy and dreams are getting further and further away from the actual reality of our lives. So Kineta follows three characters who reenact murders, but it's not that simple, or it's not that adrenaline fueled as you would think. Again, I've done a video on it where I attempt to explain what the hell's going on, but sometimes that's a little bit difficult. He has a certain style which obviously isn't going to agree with everyone, but I just absolutely love his work. Next is Alps, which is another early masterwork for me. This is probably my favourite of his early films, and this is about a bunch of characters who perform a service that they replace dead loved ones of families. So they perform the rituals and wear the clothes and do the things that the family members who have died used to do. And again, it's about society and fitting in, and it's just an amazing film. These two Kino Lorber releases have really good commentaries by Amy Simmons, which I would highly recommend. They're both Region A Kino Lorbers. And then we have Dogtooth, which is a film that kind of quote unquote broke him on the festival scene, about a family who are kind of kept apart from society by the father. I actually prefer Kineta and Alps to this one. I'm not going to say, oh yeah, this is the one that he sold out on, because he didn't. This is just as obtuse as the first two. And then we have his first English language film, which is The Lobster, which I was saying on Sunday might be, the best or my favourite film in the last 20 years. The Lobster probably is my favourite film in the last 20 years. When I first saw it, it just absolutely blew me away, about society in the not too near future, where if you're single, you're viewed as an outcast and you're sent to this island where you have to pair up with somebody else. I think you have 45 days, and if you don't, you get turned into an animal of choice. It's dark, it's absolutely wonderful. Again, Colin Farrell, who I'm not a huge fan of, but he's amazing in Lanthimos films. Again, you're either going to get the humour or you're not. It's funny, I mentioned in a video, I can't remember which one it was, about the painted bird and how I felt the animal kind of cruelty and animal death scenes in that film were just a bit too much. Now obviously The Lobster, not to go into spoilers, but it does have the death of a dog in it, which is fairly extreme and hard to watch. And I kind of mentioned that, you know, some filmmakers and some films, you give a bit of a pass to animal cruelty compared with other films and other filmmakers. But in this case, you know, it's hard to watch, but in the context of the film, the dog is actually a person who's been changed into a dog. So that made it all right for me, because people dying, you know, there's far too many people in the world anyway. So yes, that's hard, and there is other like brutal things in The Lobster, but the idea, it's just again so wonderfully shot, so wonderfully played. Olivia Colman gives a wonderful performance in this as well, as does Rachel Weisz. For me, again, if Insondies isn't my favourite film in the last 20 years, The Lobster might be. Obviously I haven't sat down and actually thought about that, but The Lobster is just amazing. And then another amazing film by him, The Killing of a Sacred Deer, again with Colin Farrell and Nicole Kidman. Again, this has humour in it that you're either going to like or really dislike. I mean, there is a lot of influence of Kubrick in Lanthimos, I would say, certainly in his compositions. We'll get to that in a minute. But his compositions are just so beautiful. His films almost you can suggest they almost exist in a parallel universe, they almost exist in a parallel world, as far as like speech patterns and things like that of characters. This one involves a young man who comes to a doctor's family. Yeah, I'm not going to go into the plot. Again, I've done a video on Caneta, the Alps, Killing of a Sacred Deer, The Lobster, The Favourite. I think I've almost done a video on all of Lanthimos' films. So you can go trawl through the channel if you're interested and pick those ones out, because I would recommend all of them because they're just amazing films. And again, I actually got Oscar success with The Favourite. Again, I was a little bit dubious about The Favourite. It was like, oh no, he's sold out. He's made like a costume drama that is getting Oscar nods. You know, Emma Stone, Rachel Weisz, and Olivia Colman are all amazing. So is Nicholas Bolting. And it was the first film that he didn't at least co-write. So I was a little bit worried about it, but then you see it and it's just an absolutely stunning film. Again, the cinematography will kind of remind you of Barry Lyndon. It's just a stunning work, absolutely beautiful. Again, it has that, you know, this isn't a starch-filled costume drama. It's obscene and rude, and it's just absolutely wonderful. And any doubts that, you know, he's cashed in for Oscar glory is quickly forgotten about when you actually watch the film, because it's absolutely marvellous. And like I said, Poor Things is his next project, which again doesn't sound like, you know, he's particularly changing his methods. It's like, yes, he's obviously left his Greek actors behind, which is a bit of a shame, including his wife, who was in a couple of his earlier films, because he had a kind of stock company of those technicians and actors. But like I said, both of them, even though they're kind of within Hollywood, and certainly Villeneuve is certainly in blockbuster territory or big film territory, they are outsiders, and they still have that outsider view of American cinema, which I think is important, and perhaps that's why, to me, they are amongst the best people working today. Again, I know that to some people that's not a particularly high bar, but certainly in this vote, I would go for Lanthimos over Villeneuve. I think his films are they're more challenging, and there's definitely something going on in his small canon of films. I love his sense of humour. I love the look of his films. I also love Villeneuve's films because they are beautiful as well. But again, let me know in the comments what you think. If you think having these two in these battles is valid, because I think we should have some directors that are actually still alive and working and perhaps at their peak. And for me, these two are certainly worth talking about, whether you like them or not. I think they're certainly worth talking about. So thanks very much for watching. Again, please let me know in the comments below who you prefer, and hopefully you'll join me again for more of these battles. Just a bit of fun. So thanks very much for watching. This is Soldier Ronan from Soldier Ronan Films saying cheerio.